find a way.
Margaret, since I have been in Bristol, there have been a lot of leaders that have come and gone, but you have been a constant big personality leading Bristol. And I have seen Bristol grow so much since I came to college here in, I guess, 1991. And that was a time where there was no reason for us to go downtown when I was in college. And there was blight. Like, it was just not a good downtown. And to see where it's come, and the way Bristol has become a model, I think, for a lot of small towns, and for you to have been a leader through all of that, I'm really curious about your perspective. If you could take us back to when you arrived in Bristol, which was what year?
1982.
Yeah. When you got to Bristol, what did you see as the biggest challenges? And did you see the city, what it could be?
So I'm going to answer that a little sideways, probably. In 1982, when we came here, we moved from Dungannon, Virginia, where my husband had been one of two physicians that opened a clinic there. So one of the things when I came here was, the big difference between a town of 350 and Bristol, even at that time. And one of the things that I noted pretty quickly was in Dungannon, the poverty was with you, and it was a mixture of the clinic board had a mixture of people, and you interacted with people every day of different walks of life, etc. And that was one of the things that hit me here, is that we could live in our very nice house that it's an old house, we love it, and go about our business and not see part of Bristol that was here. So for neighborhoods, et cetera, we didn't have to. And also Bristol, Tennessee in particular, we haven't had whole neighborhoods of big decline. It's been more spread out. So that's something that I noted that I thought in some ways was too bad to not have the experience for all of us to interact with all different kinds of people from different socioeconomic status, et cetera, that I feel like we benefited from in Dungannon. Yeah, and maybe more opportunity there for people to serve in leadership roles. That's also here is a small town, and I did not grow up being president of my class in high school, or I did help with my church youth group, but for the most part, I was not what you would identify as a leader. And when you're in a small place, you can have a big impact. And my first training was with PTA. Our kids went to VOCA. I got involved pretty quickly with PTA, and at that time, the state and national PTA offered a very good training. So I got a lot of professional training through PTA, and that helped a whole lot. So going back to your question for what I saw, I probably didn't pay close attention when we bought our house. We weren't even real good about what school district or whatever. At that time, all of our schools in our school system, which is still true, they're all good.
Yeah.
So we didn't really, that was our first house to buy. It's still the only house we've ever lived in is that one. Anyway, so it wasn't till later really paying more attention. Nothing took me downtown that much, probably JCPenney. But other than that, I didn't do that much. I was too busy with PTA and children, et cetera. I was appointed to city council in 1994 and I ran for school board in 93, and I lost. So that's, for anybody who's listening to this, that's part of it.
Yeah.
You lose, you get your name out there, and the following year they had a vacancy. Mitch Walters had won and decided that trying to please all the people all the time didn't work with selling trucks.
Yeah.
So they had a vacancy, and I was appointed to city council, which is also a nice way to start. It's a different personality that does campaigning than the governance. So I think that's a real hard for people to make decisions to serve because they have to run and campaign, and that's hard.
And what year was that?
94.
94.
94.
And you had not considered yourself a leader, certainly not a politician.
We're public servants.
But you made the choice to
step out.
To put yourself out there.
Well, it was school board.
Yeah.
Which I'd been active in PTA. I probably attended school board meetings for 7 years or something before I ran for school board. So I knew school issues. I also saw how that kind of public board operated. Also learned that sometimes it's not what comes to the table for them to address. It's what maybe never makes it to the table. If it's not going to go anywhere, then it may not even come forward to be an issue with a board. So I had not thought about city at all. And it was the seated city council. John Gaines was one of those, and Pat Hickey, Fred Essert, and Elmer Doak. So they had to choose somebody, and at that time we had 5 districts. So
all the people you just mentioned were men?
All of them were men. So the first thing I did with being appointed was I met with Dot Madison, who had been the first woman, and I would be the second woman on city council. So I met with her to see what was it like being the first woman on city council, et cetera, and met with the city manager and such. So, and John Gaines was very supportive. He had 2 daughters and understood that women needed to participate, et cetera. So not only did he support me at that time, he also supported me to be the first woman mayor, which was in 97. And that was, I was first woman mayor, obviously, first woman city council person, but we've had lots since then. But it was during that time, probably more into 95, 96, recognizing what was happening, particularly with our downtown. And we just got a quote from Governor Haslam when he was mayor of Knoxville before he was governor. Anyway, Haslam said that the downtown is everybody's home. We all own it. That's critical for communities to have a strong downtown.
And I think that's just common wisdom now, like common knowledge now. But if you go back to then, not so much, right? Because downtown was associated with not prosperity, but other, like some negative connotations with downtown. And so when I think about like small towns that have moved the needle and become more relevant, I've got to think there's moments in time and leaders that saw that took risks and made decisions that were bold. And if we go back to the mid 90s, like not everyone was supportive of liquor by the drink and and investing in downtown, right?
Right.
Well,
our downtown had gone through revitalization. That's when they put the utilities underground and did a whole lot. And it was happening to downtowns across our country. In the 50s, we started doing the subdivisions and dependent on the car. So that was the place and shopping, it went from strip malls to our malls. That was the trend. So it killed downtowns. So it took a while.
And that happened in the early 70s. Bristol's mall was built, in mid 70s? Yeah.
Whatever.
And so that took away from downtown.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. The key cornerstone downtown stores moved to the mall. So that started the deterioration. And again, it was everybody else was going through it. So my story that I tell was, I think it was 99, and we had Christmas parade. And for that Christmas parade, there were tree lights on one side of the town, the State Street, and not on the other side. And Harry Scanlon, who was at the Paramount at that time, he talked to me, and I talked to Ann Corley, who is on Bristol, Virginia City Council, and he said, we've got to fix this. We've got to get together. I told Ann Corley, this is about more than lights. So we met at the chamber, and that started a process of a downtown task force and getting a lot of people involved, and that evolved into more things. And we had Asheville Development Group to come in. We had Jonesboro historic person responsible for a lot of their historic redevelopment came in, and We had a lot of different public forums and workshops. That's when I want to sing the praises and the vision of Jerry Goodpasture and Ann Gillenwater. They wanted Beaver Creek Walk, which I was mayor at the time with Farnham Gerard. I was not keen on opening up Piedmont and building it like San Antonio, which was the thought. And there was some finding out about when San Antonio was done, they didn't have the Clean Water Act and different things that would make it more difficult.
Yeah.
But from that, first off, we got the civil engineer grants to improve the flooding status, which I don't think we would have had they not brought attention to it. And Rick Boucher was key with getting that support.
Yeah.
But they did the loft tours. There was one loft when
One
we
loft
did the
in
first
downtown.
loft tours. Yeah. And we had another one.
But it was all blight. Like State Street was a few antique stores.
Right.
There just wasn't.
There wasn't a whole lot there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably Java Jay's was there when you came.
Perhaps. Yeah.
About that time. But yeah, so and by 2000 Java Jay's was there for sure.
But that was it wasn't that long ago. Like we're talking about 30 years ago, and now.
And of course, Paramount helped to turn around our downtown. And there's so many people who we need to give credit to. And Mary Beth Raniero did so much for the Paramount, and I worked with her on the train station.
Yeah.
She was able to get Arthur Slaughter's signature on a first right of refusal. So
my experience talking to people that get things done in Bristol, it's often women who are just relentless about something they're passionate about. And all the people that you've mentioned that I know fit that mold.
Right.
But genuine leaders.
Right.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah, so they did the loft tours. They did the Border Bash, which we're getting ready to celebrate 25 years.
Yeah.
I think there's a press conference next Wednesday.
Yeah.
And they did the La Posada, the Journey's End. That's Christmas celebration. So those three things were, four, counting the civil engineering with Beaver Creek. So critical for helping to turn around downtown and get people back downtown.
It sounds like the leadership tapped into resources from the state and resources that were out there. Were there any moments where the city really had to gamble on making and investing its own dollars?
That was probably a little bit later, although they bought the Sears building, which is where McAdoo's came in later. Yeah. So that was a purchase by the city and the train station. The train station, it was going to be $200,000 for us, the Historic Association, and Bristol, Virginia. People who supported it, they wanted the train station. And then when I came back to city council people and said, here's our opportunity. And people then were like, well, I'm not sure that I want Arthur Slaughter to get $600,000. And it's like, this is it. Either we get it or we don't. It's a huge icon in our downtown, so we need to do it. So people did step up.
You were in the middle of all that. Did you have a vision for where you thought this was going, or were you more process driven, focused on the little steps?
Good question. I'd say a little of both. I mean, I went to different workshops, different webinars that were put on by national groups. So got to see what we could be.
Were you looking at larger cities and models, or smaller towns that had made the
both?
Yeah. Were there any in particular that stood out as a model?
Not probably at that time. And we talk a lot about Asheville. Asheville is a very large city. The footprint is huge for their downtown, and they have struggled with that a little bit. They also, their population is 75,000, and Bristol, Tennessee is 27,000 or about. So,
but Asheville was growing at the same time. Like go back 30 years, Asheville was not what it is now, right?
Right. Yeah. And we probably were looking more toward Asheville more recently than we were. But we had the urban design people come from Asheville too. We held a meeting at the Paramount, had great turnout. Believe in Bristol was formed during that time. We had had a Main Street program that just had served its purpose and had lost its way a little bit. And so we did the Downtown Task Force. We did it without Main Street, but we moved back to do the Main Street, which gives you guidance from the national level to help support we know this works, et cetera. So
yeah,
we did that.
And for people who aren't familiar with Bristol, everything is more complicated because it's two states and State Street, our downtown.
Right.
One side is Virginia and one side is Tennessee.
Right.
So you have all of the local political work that it takes for any town, plus you have two city councils, two mayors, and two state governments.
Right.
So how important was it that coalition bringing around both states and getting that vision for both?
Well, obviously, for a downtown that's our home for all of us, is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
So we are fortunate that we have a similar makeup structure. They have 5 council members. We have 5 council members. Mm-hmm. They elect their mayor. We elect our mayor within instead of separate. So they have city manager, which most towns are doing city manager at this point. So there are some similarities along those lines that are helpful for the structure part. But yeah, it's critical and it's not always easy.
You've mentioned a lot of people that's not just one or two leaders. You've mentioned quite a few really strong advocates and citizens who really believed in the city. And was the culture more conducive to that then? Did you see more civic participation than you is that a harder part of it now, is getting people to take on those roles?
And it's not always getting them to take them on. They rise up. We see George Link advocating for the skate park. Phenomenal. That's a citizen, and we can point to him that he has been the leader with getting our skate park going. He's come to our city council meetings on a regular basis. It moved into meeting with our Parks and Rec person once things were looking real. He is phenomenal. So that's recent example. But I think overall, civic participation is hard. People are too busy. Yeah. They're surviving. And I know I'm busier now than I've probably ever been in my life. And I should be too old to be this busy, but that's also my choice, and that's what I thrive on. I flourish with doing things. So
well, it's inspiring to see your every time through all these phases and through all of this growth of Bristol, it just seems like you have remained a leader, and it's evolved. And I've been interested and inspired by how you've done that. And you've got to stay open-minded to the vision and change, I think, to stay in that leadership position for as long as you have.
I guess with change and more recently with more people moving in and also becoming more tourist, which we like both of those things. But I do fear that we'll lose that real community. And what we've bragged, the racetracks bragged, outsiders have bragged that how welcoming Bristol is, what a good community it is, how much we do work together. There's also talking about siloing with some of the work we do, but we also can work really well together. And I just am concerned about some people coming in and the changes happening and people recognizing that, and that's why they're here, but not understanding what it takes to be that way and to be open, to be willing to work together, to be willing to meet in the middle, with working on different things. And part of that's that small town, and I just hope we don't lose it.
So you're talking about things like there's obviously change, culture changes. People change, but you're talking about things that remain true throughout that time. And what do you see as you're most concerned about us losing, or leaders may not take as importantly as you think they should?
This could transition to the other stuff. And it's not directly related. It's also, I've heard about different organizations where their board doesn't understand their history for who was involved, how things happen, appreciating that history and how it came to be, and appreciating how we have to work together to have the best outcomes. Yeah. And so that's some of what probably I'm most afraid of. Yeah. But for transitioning also, I try to remind myself, I remind my council. So in our community, we have a population, like I said, about 27,000. Bristol, Virginia has about 17,000. Total about 43,000 together, something like that. Yeah. Out of that, our demographics are, first off, higher. We're older than some communities are. But the other, income-wise, we have about 25% of people who are in poverty, both sides of town. It varies a little bit, but people who, and poverty is identified different ways for qualifying for different things, but about 25% in poverty. We have another 25%.
Is that above or below an average?
I can't remember right now. I'd say there are tons of communities that are similar.
Okay. Yeah.
And then another 25% who are ALICE. And ALICE, it was coined by a United Way in New Jersey, and it stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. So it's basically your working poor. So it's people who are living paycheck to paycheck. They get a medical bill, they get a car repair, something that upsets the apple cart, and they can slip down to the poverty level. So that means almost about 50%, and I think it might be a little higher in Bristol, Virginia, not much, of our population are struggling every day just to make ends meet and to go forward. There's a poverty simulation that we've done here in Bristol several times, and it's a group got together to sponsor it originally. A couple people are frequent facilitators. You buy a kit, and BTS helped to buy the original kit several years ago. The school system just bought an updated kit, but it's a simulation best with 40 or more up to 80 people assigned to be a single person, a family of 4, a single mom, whatever, and they're given a role, and they have 15-minute segments. Every 15 minutes is a week. And so they have to go to work or find a job. They have to pay their rent. They have to do all the things that you have to do to live. And it's really more emotional than it is academic. During the process of that hour, that 15 minutes, people are evicted. People go hungry. People are fired from their jobs for not showing up, et cetera. So, and then there's debriefing at the end to talk about it. I helped to facilitate it several times. And then when I participated, I knew how people's reactions were. But for me personally, so I was in a family that I was a mom, we had a dad, we had 2 kids. And at the end, when we debriefed, it was the realization of me and the dad were so busy making our ends meet and paying our bill and being sure we got to work. We didn't pay any attention to our children. We did not pay any attention to our children. So then you think about the real life and we wonder how things are. It's no wonder that children don't always get what they need, because if you're surviving and you're trying to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, transportation's an issue, et cetera. So it's a really good process to go through to have a little bit of a wake up to understand.
It's a very
internalize a little bit.
It's a very different perspective than a lot of the national conversation about the Appalachian poor being lazy.
Oh, absolutely.
And what you're saying is that absolutely. They are. It's not laziness. It is just survival.
Right. Okay, so that'll segue
Yeah.
into what we talked about a few
Well,
minutes ago.
I'm curious.
Okay, go ahead.
So students did this simulation.
No,
or
no,
adults?
it's adults.
Okay.
It's adults.
What were they most surprised by? Because you mentioned earlier one of the things that you thought struck you in Bristol is almost like not racial segregation as much as socioeconomic segregation.
Right.
So
right.
the that population, that we just don't come into contact with one another and understand one another's struggles. And this simulation
helps give you a feel
bridges
for
that gap.
Right.
So what were people most surprised
a lot
by?
of we haven't gotten all the population that we really would like to have. So like the school system, Bristol, Tennessee does the simulate, and they've done it in Bristol, Virginia as well for teachers. So we know our teachers deal with things all the time, but it helps them to see a little bit what might be behind the scenes if they're not already aware. And again, you can be cognitively academic. I'm aware, but to get a little bit of taste of experience and what that feels like or what the realization. So I think it's more that so far from the people. And we've had people from congregations, from churches participate. So I think it's the emotional part of really realizing what it can be and what it could really be like, and also may make a difference on how they approach things or needs that are then identified.
A very tangible example for me was when I had Kelly Vance on the podcast, and she heads up Viking Academy, and that, by the way, is one of the coolest things happening in Bristol. And but I
would think every Tennessee high student would want to be at Viking Academy.
Yeah, no, what they've done, and it's so authentically Bristol. Like there wasn't a playbook for this. It's not like they borrowed this model from outside. Like they built this alternative to alternative schools, and it's working, and it's just a really cool story. But one of the things that I asked her, like, what's going on in kids' lives that would surprise me, and she said, transportation. Like I've always taken transportation for granted. This is not a pedestrian friendly city.
Right.
You have to have a car to get to a job.
Yep.
There's not great public transit. And she says the kids, if they lack transportation, they're blocked from opportunity.
Absolutely. They can't play sports. Somebody's got to pick them up at the end of sports.
Yeah.
They can be there at the beginning of practice, but not at the end.
And so they've got kids that 16 years old that are wanting to do co-ops and internships, and they're creating those opportunities, but they don't have the transportation.
Yep.
And like it was such a tangible example to me for what you're talking about, that things that we just don't grasp.
Right.
And just so ignorant of the challenges that other people have.
And that's also people doing human services absolutely know that housing and transportation are the biggest issues.
Yeah. And so the problem with the housing is you can't just build housing 10 miles outside of city center.
Ideally, you want it next to transportation.
Right.
And transportation, we're very fortunate to have what we have.
Yeah.
We know it doesn't run on weekends. It stops at, I think ours is at 7 and Bristol, Virginia is at 6 p.m. Bristol, Tennessee does have a job access program where you can get transportation to work.
Yeah.
But that's not easy to work with.
Yeah.
There's NetTrans that can help also. So there are, but if everybody who needed it used it, we wouldn't be able to meet the need.
But our school leaders in Bristol are literally providing transportation and figuring, like they are solving that problem with just their ingenuity and grind.
Right.
Like it's really inspiring what they're doing. But that's not, if you'd told me like that's the biggest problem,
right.
That's not what I would have chosen.
Right.
But like without transportation,
right.
your world is so small.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So what I mentioned earlier that I really learned tons about in the last several years is that I had known, we all common knowledge how critical the early childhood development is.
Mm-hmm.
The psychologist I learned that, I don't know, high school, certainly college, that the first 5 years are critical.
Okay.
So what's newer is the brain science to know why that is and what happens. And so that's newer. And it came from a 1997 study, a Kaiser Permanente study. And it was two people who studied it. The people that they did a survey with were educated, mostly white, Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a special population, not not a mixed. And what they discussed, they asked people about 10 different traumas for their childhood between the age of birth to 18. And some of those were if you grew up with mental illness in your family, if you grew up with alcoholism in your family, if there was drug use, if there was a divorce, if there was sickness. So they identified 10 different things. And then what they followed, it was a longitudinal study that takes a long, those aren't done as often because you have to wait for the results. What they found is the more adverse things that they had, adverse childhood experiences, which is called ACEs, that somebody had, the more likely they were themselves to have problems with addiction, have mental health issues. And to me, the most surprising is they would have physical illnesses, higher chance of diabetes, and a higher chance of immune disease. So not just our behavior affected, but also our physical health. There's a book called The Body Keeps Score, and he talks about ACEs, and he also talks about PTSD, that people in war and battle, et cetera. So it's kind of the same thing happens to your brain with adverse childhood experiences. And and we've also have to talk about resilience. So if somebody has had a lot of adverse childhood experiences, but they have a grandmother who really cared about them, if they had a school coach, if they had somebody who was significant in their life, that can help to balance. So not everybody who has had these check-off things end up having major issues. It depends also how much resilience you have in your life. So, what was I going to say? Out of everything, the most important that is in addiction, is in brain development, et cetera, is caring relationships. That's the most important. So, and that's where you have the child at home. They have to have attachment to an adult. Usually it's the mom. Are we talking
specifically 0 to 5, or is this 0 to 18?
It's 0 to 18, but the critical time is about 0 to 5. And then there's another burst of development in teenagers that also, and what happens is, so there's brain architecture. They've got all these words that are pretty good, that during that time period, the brain architecture is built. And if you can build a good architecture, then everything that goes on, it works well, right? If you don't have that strong brain architecture, then there's nothing to keep building on. So it makes it very difficult. And what it is, it's the synapses that are formed. And if the right synapses aren't formed, if you're in fight or flight, and there's a fantastic TED Talk by Nadine Burke-Harris, who's a pediatrician who found out about the study 10 years later, was able to identify that a lot of her ADHD, identified, not diagnosed, children in her practice had adverse childhood experiences that she could talk about. But anyway, the fight or flight part of your brain develops, and the deals with the more the more you experience the same thing, the more that's emphasized. So the synapses build more connections. And what's missing is the logic and the decision making. So if you're, as a child, and her example is with alcoholism, and you don't know what's going to walk through the door.
Yeah.
And you're 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're in not knowing, am I going to have a nice parent, or am I going to be kicked across the room, or am I going to see my mom hurt, etc., because it doesn't have to be direct, it can be indirect. So then that changes. You're on this level of function, and you can't be on the thing. It's like anything. It happens to us, and we focus, right? And we're not necessarily making good judgment decisions when that happens.
Spur of the moment survival type
that stays all the time. So the more you remain in that your body chemistry, et cetera, has to maintain that. So you can't do what needs to be done to be able to develop the frontal cortex part.
And so that manifests itself in those sorts of responses later in life.
It means that particularly that if you can't develop that decision making and logic. So to me, when I learned it, it was like, oh my gosh, I know people who they make the same mistake. And it's like they made this mistake and then they make the same kind of mistake again.
Yep.
And it's like, well, it's not that they're choosing to make the wrong mistake. If they don't have the physiology, the brain chemistry and physiology to make good decisions, then that it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So it's figuring out, and part of there's all kinds of things. It's a lot to take in, but self-regulation is what we want to help kids to learn. I talked to somebody recently that they did timeouts for their kids. And I said, well, now our school system, which is very oriented in this direction, they do self-regulation time. So it's not as a punishment. It's that, hey, we need to, here's this spot over here, or here's our room in our school that you can go and you can listen to music. You can, they have the little sandboxes you can play in, or different things. So they can take a breath. And we've also learned about breathing. Breathing is huge, deep breathing to help you reset. So you can take time and work on that self-regulation. So knowing that, I also have felt that because of the work I do with people who are experiencing homelessness, et cetera, hearing people say, well, seeing a young, healthy-looking male and saying, well, he could get a job if he wanted to. Well, he might be able to, he might not be able to. If he hasn't had the right brain development and nobody's ever worked with him on that, then trying to keep a job, trying to follow instructions, trying to work with others, he may not be able to. Sure, maybe he can get a job. Can he keep a job? Can he have a career? If he doesn't have the brain function that helps him to do that. And this is pretty new, and in the counseling world, they've changed how it's not just saying, well, Matt, tell me about how you grew up and that, let's talk about that. It is recognizing that we need to do some things that helps the brain to connect those synapses. And it's a whole lot harder to do. It's doable, but a whole lot harder after the fact than if we can reach children and families to help that development happen early on. So that's what our schools are doing. That's what we're trying to do a whole lot, the move toward higher standards. And with higher standards, you have to have higher pay for our child care people. Child care is usually very low paying. And yeah, that's the most important time. I went before I even got very far in learning about this. A National League of Cities workshop on economic development was brain development. They said if you are doing economic development in your community and you're not working with your child care status, you're not doing economic development, because those are going to be your workers in 20 years. And if they don't have the right brain development, they're not going to be a good workforce. So anyway,
so that's a big problem to solve, right? Like, it's
a huge problem.
You're talking about problems within the home that are the source of this. A lot of them are systemic,
right?
Very difficult problems to solve. And so how does a society or a city, where can you make the biggest difference there? Is it through teachers at those younger ages? How do you move the needle there?
So I'm glad you said systemic, because that's also, there is so many. So one thing about the work that I do, and I do it, is we depend so much on individuals. We say, okay, we'll work with you, we'll support you. Here are some of the tools you can use. We'll help you learn those tools. We will help you, but it's up to you. You got to be ready to do it. You got to do the work, etc. And on the other hand, there's so many systemic issues that set up barriers that prevent people from being the best they can be. So systemic issues are a problem. And yes, for teachers and congregations and churches, anybody, Parks and Rec. So I guess maybe the academic side, and ETSU has Strong Brain Institute that they've been working in this whole area. And there's a woman, Becky Haas, who has become an international trainer that started at ETSU. Actually, started at Johnson City's police department, working with them. But so instead of just talking about, so we talk about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. We talk about trauma-informed care, which is being educated on ACEs, and that's going to make a difference on how I approach things and how I treat you, et cetera. It's being very sensitive. It doesn't mean there aren't consequences, doesn't mean that reality's not there, but how I respond to you. And one of those things is, instead of saying what's wrong with you, it's to say what happened to you. So instead of what's wrong with that guy over there, you might think, well, be curious. What happened to him that is causing him to be this way? That's a big thing to talk along those lines. But we've kind of evolved to talk a lot about resilience. So, and I think part of the reasons why we have talked more now about resilience is because ACEs, trauma, I mean, it's overwhelming, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
for sure.
Oh my gosh,
yeah, where do you start?
What do we do with this child? How do we do this? So with resilience, it's something we can all do. It's, what do we do for resilience? We have reading buddies. We have scouts. We have after-school programs. We have churches that do things. We have volunteers in our schools. All kinds of different things that help to build resilience.
And when you say resilience, you're talking about relationships.
Most of it. So thank you for asking. So I've been active. I've helped to the beginning of what was Bristol's Promise, and now it's Appalachian Promise Alliance. It was Bristol's Promise Youth Networking Alliance. Anyway, we changed our name because we do more regional work. But we based that on America's Promise. And America's Promise started in 1997 with all the living presidents coming together, and it was General Colin Powell who was the convener, sort of. I imagine that the president sat around and drank bourbon or Coke and smoked cigars and talked while everybody else did the work, right? Anyway, I don't know how much they participated, but they were looking at moving into a new century. So what can we do? So what they did was that effort, they looked at the Search Institute, which has 40 developmental assets. And they had looked at, instead of asking why do children fail, they said, why do children succeed? If we can look at what's behind success with kids and get that recipe and provide it for all our children, then we'll have success. And those had things like after school programs and taking music and going to church and also internal sense of success, et cetera. Anyway, so what they did was take those 40 and they made 5 promises. And those 5 promises, the first one is ongoing relationships with caring, responsible adults. And by far, we've identified more and more that is the most critical.
And if you're fortunate, you have those in your family, in your household.
Right, but not everybody does.
Not everybody does.
And the research shows you really need 3 caring adults. So if you have a single mom, who cares? And that's one of them. They still need 2 more in their life. And, they may have a grandmother, they may have a grandfather, they may have somebody else that's within their family, but they might not, or they might not have enough contact with that person to really help out. Anyway, it's a healthy start and future. It's being sure there's prenatal care all the way through, that they have access to health care. For our children, for the most part, that's works with, we have 10 care and the programs for our children in Tennessee that have worked. We'll see what happens with the current status of things. Safe places and structured activities during non-school hours. So for teens, we found out that the most dangerous time for them to get in trouble was from 3 to 6. It was when they were home from school, unsupervised, before adults were around to keep them in line. So having those structured activities, not only to keep them out of trouble, but to help build the resilience. Education for marketable skills. So and we've certainly been working on that even as a country, but our school system, seeing if people have certifications when they graduate, so they're ready for jobs, ready to go. And the last one I think is pretty interesting, and it's an opportunity to give back to the community. Recognizing community service does so much for how we feel. It means contact with adults who might connect you with other things. It means people might give you references. They might give you a job later. That giving back does so much beyond just a volunteer job for kids. And at some point, we also realized, and it was thanks to somebody in a meeting who said, those 5 promises, it's not just kids that need it. That's exactly what families need too. They need mentors. They need safe places. They need health care. They need marketable skills and a chance to give back to the community. So at Family Promise, we've seen several people. We have 3 volunteers who we have helped get them in housing that are now volunteering for Family Promise. And they were great anyway, but watching them as they volunteered and their confidence that they've built and what they've developed in their skills. So these are people
that have received this support services, and now they're giving back.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
It's cool, but it is also a consistent the healthy nonprofits that I've had on here. Most of them have referenced something like this, like the Salvation Army is a good example.
Yes. Like they're our partner for Family Promise.
Yeah, but there's a component of it, like when an organization, I guess when a community is healthy, your people who receive or end up giving back.
Right.
And that's like the holy grail when you can create a village like that.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've learned a whole lot and still learning more, and I think it's just fascinating for the brain development piece of it and et cetera. I feel that I've been really fortunate when we moved here from Dungannon, like I said at the beginning, and saw that you could live your life without experiencing people who are having difficulty or living on the edge or whatever. I feel like having been in Dungannon was a gift. And here early on, Carl's our oldest and Neil's next, and they did Cub Scouts, and I did Cub Scout leader. And half the people in the troop had single moms struggling. So we were involved with their lives and helping to support them. And I feel like not everybody has the opportunity. Some people may want to help and they haven't had the opportunity to really immerse themselves with lives of people that you can relate with and understand and help yourself grow into better perspectives of where people are coming from and what the struggles might be.
There's a lot of science that's gone into this. Mm-hmm. The results are not overly complicated, though, right? Like the answers that you've said are not, they're not complicated. Right. They're fairly simple, but they are very difficult. Like if you boil it down and say, kids need 3 people in their lives. Right. 3 ideally stable people in their lives to give them resilience through trauma and just life's difficulties. That seems pretty understandable.
Oh, we could do this,
and not just kids, but adults too. Right. Like you need 3
the mentors.
You need 3 friends who that
are caring, responsible, stable. Yeah.
But then you think in 2025, that's not so easy, because I don't know that we've ever been lonelier. We've never been more disconnected. Like some of the examples that you've brought up today, PTA used to be like
a big deal,
massive community of parents.
Right.
PTA is probably lucky today to get 10 people to show up for a function. Cub Scouts. Right. Like that was a cornerstone of society for so long. Right. And you think about, like, is it because we've become so busy? Like all of us have become so busy that we don't have time to form those 3
relationships.
Those 3 relationships. Is it, how much of it is transportation? Like Cub Scouts, for example.
I took the kids home.
Yeah, like
for some of the time I'd wait for people to come pick them up, and it was like, how long am I going to be here? So I took them home. Yeah, not everybody could do that. Exactly. Also, I met after school, so the kids were already there.
If you don't have that in your home, now transportation. If you don't have transportation, that's a barrier to getting it. Yep. So now you're talking about, well, where are they going to get those relationships? Right. That's a lot on teachers.
It's a lot on teachers.
And it sounds like these organizations have done a lot of work with the school system. But teachers are so exhausted too. Yes. Like the things that they have to do now.
Right.
And it's a lot.
A lot of this also, it's emphasized for self-care, that people who work with children and people with trying to build that resilience, it's the provider needs to have self-care. Who has time for self-care if you're doing this work? But no, I do feel like we know a lot on how to help people. Adults as well as kids. And I think the school systems are doing some pretty awesome stuff with they've moved in that right direction. They're still building it. But for school system and also out in the community, like with Family Promise, it takes intensive case management. That's part of that relationship. Yeah. Because of finances, we went from 3 case managers down to 1. Yeah. And it's not a short fix. It's not, it means, and so we help people get into housing. We've had housing dollars off and on. We're real concerned about what's going to be happening. We're concerned about whether we'll be even able to have a program in another 8 months or something. But it takes intensive case management, and that really takes people. There's some volunteers who could do that, but the intensive case management, and when people get into housing, you don't walk away and say, oh, we did it. We got them in housing. You've got to be there so that, because as people hopefully can move out of poverty or get to a different level, it's not like this. It's going to be up and
That's
down
right.
and up and down.
That's right.
And
which is why you call it resilience.
Right. So it costs a lot of money to pay people to do, and that's what school system needs too, is enough people who are paid to do those jobs. Then the rest of us can augment with volunteering and other programs, etc.
I think there's a danger in talking about these big problems in that it can become so overwhelming, right? Like any one of these problems, whether it's homelessness or addiction or childhood trauma, resilience, like there's such big problems. It's easy to get overwhelmed. And I think back to, I had a Isaiah 117 house and Rhonda Paulson was on.
Right.
And, what she's done is pretty extraordinary. And I remember her saying, like, don't get overwhelmed. Just take one step after another, right? And so it's these little steps. But the other thing that I've learned from these conversations is the hero of the story is that caseworker.
Right.
Like you said case management.
Case manager, right. Some of them are social workers. In Tennessee, you have to be careful. They can't be a social worker without a degree. So, but case manager.
But what that looks like is a human being.
Yep.
Right. It's not a bureaucrat. That's not a nonprofit organization. It's not a 501c3. It's a human being. Frequently,
it's going to be a human being that has a lot of adverse childhood experiences in their life. So they have come to it because they are passionate about helping other people.
Yeah. For Helen Scott was on here with Healing Hands, and they provide all kinds of services. But where the most important point, and she made a point of this, is their caseworkers.
Right.
The people that have the contact with the people in need are the ones that make the difference, and they try to empower those caseworkers. But it's the same thing with Isaiah 117. It's the same thing with the Salvation Army, and you're talking about the same thing. It's the hero of the story is that person, that caseworker. It's also, those positions are very dependent upon funding.
Yes.
Right? Because these are not like, if an accountant gets a hold of this, like, that's the first thing that's probably going to be cut is that hero of the story.
Right.
And now you're left with an organization without the person that really makes a difference.
Right. No, the organization doesn't have a reason to be there other than advocacy and educating. No, a while back it was realizing that funding is critical and funding is policy. It's how you spend your money.
Yeah.
That's a policy.
Yeah.
So being sure that you're funding things that make a difference. We've had trouble with Family Promise helping our funding agencies to understand that case management is our program. Sometimes granting agencies, they want to see things, they'll pay for rent, they'll pay for your computer, they'll pay for this, but they count case management as administration. And it's like, it is not, we've got those other things. What we need is salary for our case manager, who is a professional, who needs to have a salary that reflects that, because we don't want them to be an Alice population, which most of them probably are. And so it's helping even our funders to understand that is our program. So that's been a little bit of a struggle. So, and what it takes, like to take somebody who is on the street, that's been on the street for a while, and get them ready to go into housing, get them into housing and keep them in housing. It's not cheap. And first off, it's not cheap because you got to pay deposits and all that. But then it's not cheap because that case manager's time is so valuable in helping to keep that person on the right track.
Yeah, and they're spread so thin. Like when you look at the case managers, these positions that exist, like it's a lot.
Right.
Like it's a lot of It's a lot of
It's a lot.
cases.
But to go back, that's what's nice about resilience, though, is that we all can do something. And that's where certainly there's a lot of volunteering. And also for the big picture and the systemic is we need, and this is really hard, we need to pay attention to what we're voting for what their positions are, what is happening, because the policies are set, and that's whether it's local, state, what their priorities are and what they value, and be sure that aligns with what we feel like is important, what we care about. That's critical. But
there's been a lot of conversation recently about waste and a real concerted effort to weed out waste. You've been involved in a lot of nonprofits, and can you speak to, I do think I've had experience with nonprofits where there is a lot of waste, but I've also seen a lot of nonprofits that are making every dollar go as far as it can possibly go. In your experience, what do you see in that?
The nonprofits I've worked with, and that's both human services and it's Believe in Bristol and some other ones, there's absolutely not enough funding, and that it's absolutely spent. And that's what boards are there for, and they need to, you and I, people who serve on boards need to be for sure paying attention. That's our job to do that. No, I did say that government and nonprofits, most of the people that I knew were working the equivalent of a job and a half. Since COVID, I'd say the equivalent of at least 2 jobs. And I think people are going to be asked to work more than that. And that means they can't do the best job because they're spread too thin. But nothing gets done. It's going to be very, very, it's already hard when you see people in need and you cannot help them. For case managers, for organizations. And if we don't have funding, both for case management, but also for housing, et cetera, we're going to tell a family that they're going to have to be on the street. That their kids are going to be taken away from them. It's the last line of defense. There is no safety net after that. Right. Yep. And I think we've already been seeing some increase with the housing situation.
It's a problem.
A lot of people on fixed income who can no longer afford rent. But if some things happen at the federal level that's looking like it's going to happen, we're going to see people on the street. Significant number of people on the street. And
it's the answer to that would be more volunteers, less paid staff, but that
doesn't work.
That is it. It
doesn't work.
They're not. They can't be trained. They're not.
Right.
They're not going to be as good at it if it's not their full time.
Also, a long time ago, I was doing a church program on hunger, and one of the exercises that I think it was Bread for the World suggested is you get 24 grocery bags, like the paper ones, set them up in front of the room. Take 4 away. Those 4 are what nonprofits and churches do for feeding hunger. 20 are the federal programs. It's for food stamps, it's for Meals on Wheels, it's for school lunches. And then you have a discussion, is the nonprofit and church faith sector ready to take on 20 more bags? Where are we right now stretched with the volunteers that are available and the donations, et cetera? For the most part, we think that can't happen. And that's why government funding is so critical to help the big picture for a lot of the different programs that make a huge difference.
Because we've just seen a massive decline in volunteerism in the past 20 years.
Right, but volunteers couldn't have filled that void.
Right.
But yes, we have, and again, that's some of it's time, but also, and maybe people feeling like they're not, useful. The other, we talk about housing first for people. They need a roof over their heads before they can work on their addiction issue, before they can keep a job, et cetera. And more with that, we're talking about community first. So I think the same thing applies. We need community. I mean, it's Bowling Alone, which was a book that came out. The bowling teams went away.
Yep.
So we absolutely need to be looking at, yes, what can we do to build our community?
Yeah. So. This individualism, this loneliness, this busyness.
And a lot of people who are lonely probably are not busy. They may be at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not feeling like they have a purposeful life.
It just doesn't seem sustainable.
Right.
It just doesn't seem sustainable, right?
Right.
Like,
right.
Do you think we'll see the pendulum shift to more of a community first mindset? I mean, I don't know how we could go further on the spectrum to
hope not
individual,
right.
like this individual lonely place society is.
Right. I hope so. I mean, I'm not real good at my civic knowledge and my American history, but we've been built on individualism. That's been emphasized, and people have talked about the myth of the cowboy and that independent riding off into. So part of that is rewriting the story and really appreciating that and building that part of our culture that probably has not been as emphasized. So I think, sure, if life gets a lot harder, then community may be more important, but it also could be more isolating. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's something.
If they don't have transportation,
they
can't get places.
Yeah. Something's got to give though. Like it can't. I don't think it can continue on this trajectory. And even with housing, I think part of the solution we're starting to see is multi-generational housing, going back to multi-generations living in a house, like friends living in a house. Like that seems daunting. It seems treacherous, but that
it's also what a lot of young people and college students do for sharing housing
and adults through history have done that.
Right.
But Margaret, if we go back to the beginning and you came to Bristol and you had a lot of highly educated, lots of options. You have chosen to, I would say, be just a model citizen in leadership. You've given a lot to Bristol. I'd like to hear your advice to a 20-year-old female who is in that place in her life, and she's faced with just the busyness of existing in the world that we live in. I'm curious what your advice to her would be.
Well, if that's somebody who's just trying to survive, that's harder to give advice. If somebody does have some available time, I really enjoy talking with people of any age, and I just got an email that I haven't responded to yet, looking forward to somebody who's a young person who's heard that I might be helpful in how to make a difference. So my suggestion is let's get together and find a time that works, and I want to hear what you're interested in. And because of my position, I know a fair amount. There's a lot happening that I'm not as involved with anymore. It's a lot bigger. But to see if there's suggestions for that young person to where they might find a niche, where they might find a home. So just trying for people to get involved. Also talking about community, my good friend Samantha Gray, who does parenting education with Appalachian Promise, but she also is director at Theater Bristol. Theater Bristol is a huge place for people to find community. And it's doing sets, it's painting, it's whatever, but you can find a home there with other people, and all are welcome, and you get to see a production at the end, whether you painted a wall or whatever, but trying to find your niche that does help to build that community.
I can't remember who it was that was on here, and they said, volunteering is a great way to network.
Yep.
And it's not like you're choosing to volunteer rather than pursue your career.
Right.
In today's world, you're going to have to do both because very few people have the luxury of just volunteering.
Right.
Right?
Which that's been me. I have done most of my life without pay, and that's because I have a husband who has supported my doing that, and also because he had an income that allowed me to do that.
But I think it would be easy for a young person to be so consumed by trying to build a career to survive that they forget
what that, and it builds resilience. As well as, and part of that resilience is networking and also exploring. You volunteer for something, and maybe you try something that you are afraid to do in any other way. You volunteer, and it could change your life. You could take your career in a different direction, or bring something to your career that you didn't think about before.
Yeah, like Leah Ross is a great example of that. She talks about, she may have been the one that made that comment, but she volunteered for something, a music festival or something, and then that ended up leading to rhythm and roots. Like, she found her passion through volunteerism.
Right.
And it's just, we do so, I see young people volunteering less and less. And I think they're gonna lose some meaning, but also losing opportunities to learn about themselves. Right.
Yep.
Well, you're
good discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, I've said this a few times, but your life and your contributions have been inspiring because you didn't have to give, and you've chosen to do that. And it's just, I hope it's a model for other people.
Thank you.
So thanks for being here.
All right. Thank you.